So fellas, since UFC 323 is the last remaining pay-per-view of 2025, I thought we'd bring back Volkanovski one more time this year and build a stacked Volkanovski versus Murphy card for UFC 323 as well as a Derrick Lewis main event, because Lewis has been killing it in the recent main events. I thought we'd build another Derrick Lewis main event for this year. And we'll start off with the early prelims of UFC 323. To kick it off, I'm going to debut Tommy McMillan. Just came from the Contender Series. I'd do Tommy McMillan versus Bogdan Grad to kick off UFC 323. If you don't know Tommy McMillan, he's undefeated, 9-0. A shit ton of finishes on the regional scene. He's basically a training partner of Sean O'Malley, had a ton of hype, just won on the Contender Series as well, and he's one of the more hyped guys coming from the Contender Series. And I put him against Bogdan Grad, who's also got a high finishing rate, lost his most recent fight in the UFC, so I think he should fight a debutant, but they're two guys with a high finishing rate. Tommy McMillan with a ton of hype coming over. I think a good card to debut against would be a pay-per-view. UFC 323 kicking off the card, making his UFC debut. Good time for him as well, because he's just fought in August, he's just fought in September, so it gives him enough time to prepare for December. So Tommy McMillan, Bogdan Grad, get that fight done to kick off UFC 323, just to get Tommy McMillan in the UFC. Obviously, I don't care who you put him against, but he's got a bit of hype, coming from the Contender Series, Sean O'Malley teammate, get him in the UFC. And another debut I'd also do on UFC 323 is Icaro Brito versus Darren Elkins. Now, I'll talk about why I've decided Darren Elkins, but the Fighting Nerds might be the best gym in the UFC right now, and we've got a new Fighting Nerd that just dropped. We've got Icaro Brito, who's going to be fighting on the Contender Series in a couple of weeks. He's 8-1, a bunch of finishes on the regional scene. He's going to be fighting on the Contender Series, I think, next week or in a couple of weeks' time, and he's a massive favorite. He's probably going to pull through. So I think we get him in the UFC, a brand new fighting nerd. And the reason I've chosen Darren Elkins is because Elkins is, if there was a beyond washed, he's beyond washed. Now he's a free highlight reel. It would be a perfect fight to debut Icaro Brito in the UFC. This new fighting nerd on the prelim, give him a free highlight reel over Darren Elkins to build a bit of hype. I think it's the perfect way to debut. Get Icaro Brito in the UFC. Again, gives him enough time. His Contender Series fights, I think, on the 23rd of September, so he's got enough time to prepare for December. Icaro Brito, brand new fighting nerd. Get him in the UFC in December against Darren Elkins. I think that makes sense on the prelims. Not too big, not too big of a stage. It's only the second prelim of the night, but give him a free highlight reel on Darren Elkins to see how good he is. I'd also do Casey O'Neill versus Carly Judas. Casey O'Neill trains out of Australia, so we're getting some new Australian talent on the Volkanovski card. And I'd put against Carly Judas. Carly Judas might actually be the most violent women MMA fighter right now. She got a brutal KO this year where she head kicked her opponent unconscious to kick off the year. And she just beat the crap and got a finish of Nicole Cagliari as well. Every single one of her wins in MMA is all by way of finish. And Casey O'Neill, she's coming off a good win over Luana Santos last year, where she was a massive favourite. She's been out ever since, but I think, I think it just makes sense. You need some women MMA on the card, get it on the early prelims, get it out the way. Carly Judas is pretty violent, one of the more fun women MMA fighters to watch. Casey O'Neill's from Australia, she's fighting on a Volkanovski card. I think if there's a women MMA fight that I'm acceptable with, it's this one. It's on the early prelims, it's probably going to be violent. It makes sense from both sides. Casey O'Neill, Carly Judas for the early prelims. Then we're going to have a third debutant on the early prelims, a debut heavy card, as Luke Riley is going to be debuting against Francis Marshall. Now, if you don't know who Luke Riley is, well, I'm also doing it because he's from England, and obviously Lerone Murphy's in the main event. You want to get English talent on the card. But if you don't know who Luke Riley is, he's 11-0, undefeated. He's got this big record from the regional scene. He's essentially one of the biggest stars in the UK outside of the UFC. A massive star in Cage Warriors. He trains with Paddy Pimblett, and he's got a lot of hype coming over to the UFC. That much hype, he didn't have to go through the Contender Series, just got an immediate contract. And Francis Marshall, he's been doing his thing in the UFC. He's been taking a couple of losses. I thought he won his most recent fight against Myron Santos, but I think it makes sense. Luke Riley's probably going to debut this year. He's been saying he wants to debut in November, December. So I think if Lerone Murphy's going to be headlining a pay-per-view event and he's going to be fighting for a belt, I think we need some English talent on the card. Get Luke Riley on the early prelims to kind of get some English talent on the card, make his debut. And he's not fighting an easy opponent as well. Francis Marshall ain't an easy guy to beat. I know his record says otherwise, but he trains with Grant Dawson. He's a good wrestler. I thought he beat Myron Santos. This is a perfect test for Luke Riley. If you're going to skip the Contender Series, let's see how good you can do in the UFC. Main event in the early prelims, which, I mean, that doesn't really mean anything, does it? But, yeah, get Luke Riley in the UFC. Get him on the Lerone Murphy card against Francis Marshall. Then for the prelims, to kick off the prelims, I'm going to do Quillan Salkilde versus Jai Herbert. Again, the Australia versus UK theme, which is going to be in the main event. I was trying to look for kind of an Australia-UK fight, and I thought this fight made sense. Quillan Salkilde is one of Australia's best prospects right now. Knocked out Ancho KO Jubilee in about 20 seconds in February and just turned into Khabib when he fought Yanal Ashmouz. That showed that Australian wrestling exists, dominated Yanal Ashmouz in his most recent fight. And Jai Herbert is a bit of a journeyman, can't really string together a winning streak to save his life, so it's probably going to be a highlight reel for Quillan Salkild, but it makes sense. Like I said, Australia versus England, Quillan Salkild getting a bit of a step up against Jai Herbert. I think that makes sense to kick off the prelims, and again, to kind of showcase Quillan Salkild on a pay-per-view, so get him in there against Jai Herbert, I think that makes sense. And then we're going to have Steve Erceg versus Charles Johnson. So this is where the card kind of starts to heat up. Yeah, I think this fight makes sense as well. Steve Erceg was obviously on a 3-fight losing streak against top opponents, and he just beat Oddy Osborne in his most recent fight, so he's in a weird position. He's losing to the best, but beating cans. There's no middle ground for Steve Erceg, and I think put him against Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson deserves to step up. He's won 5 of his last 6 fights, including a knockout win over Joshua Van, who's going to be fighting for a belt in his next fight, and over Lonnie Kavanagh, who was the best flyweight prospect at the time of fighting him. I think the winner of this fight gets a top 5. If Steve Erceg wins, get him another top 5 opponent. If Charles Johnson wins, give him a top 5 opponent. There's big implications for this fight, and like I said, Johnson's probably one of the best up-and-coming guys we've got in flyweight right now. Steve Erceg's a well-known name. They're both coming off really good wins. Put them against each other. Again, the whole Australian thing with Steve Erceg being on a Volkanovski card makes sense as well to kind of get the Australian audience in. Winner gets someone in the top 5, and it would be a violent fight too. Charles Johnson can crack. We've seen that in a couple of his fights. Steve Erceg's one of the better boxers in this division. I think it'd be a banger of a fight. It makes sense from a sense of rankings. It's got big implications. Erceg, Johnson, get that done for UFC 323. And again, similar to the time frame, they've both fought in August. It gives them enough time to prepare for December. Get that done. And then we're going big, and I mean literally going big. Tai Tuivasa's returning against Mick Parkin. Now, before I talk about the fight, again, Australia versus England is a bit of a theme because we've got Volkanovski versus Murphy. Yeah, Tuivasa's looking big these days. You know, he's been looking massive. He was big before, but apparently he's weighing over 300 pounds nowadays. And, you know, he's been looking obese. We saw him at the UFC 312 press conference. He did not look fight ready. And he said he wants to return in early 2026. December 2025, early 2026, pretty much the same thing. I think if he makes an effort, he can probably make weight and make it to a Volkanovski card in December. He's on a 5-fight losing streak. There's not much hype really left with Tai Tuivasa, but I put him against Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin's just lost to Marcin Tybura. He's going to want a bit of, not necessarily a step down, but he's not going to want anyone in the top 10. If I'm being honest, I probably would have put Tuivasa in there with an easier opponent than Mick Parkin, but I like the whole England versus Australia vibe we've got going on. And to be fair, it's a winnable fight for Tuivasa. It's probably the most winnable one out of everybody he's just fought, because to be fair, Tuivasa has been facing monsters at heavyweight. And Mick Parkin, he wants to bounce back, get him on a pay-per-view, an England headliner with Laurent Murphy, against a big name in Tai Tuivasa. I think this will be massive for the prelims, because even though Tuivasa's, you know, his career's not been going his way, he's still one of the biggest Australian stars we've got in the UFC. So you put him against Mick Parkin, probably doesn't go the distance. An opportunity for Tuivasa to get another KO win. So yeah, I like it. Again, I don't know how realistic this fight is, because I don't know if or even when Tuivasa's coming back, but if he is coming back, I think get him in the last card of 2025 to fit one fight in the year, late 2025. Get him in there. And then for the prelim headliner, I do Marvin Vettori versus Gregory Rodriguez. I like this fight a lot. Marvin Vettori's career's not been going his way. He's been losing all the time now. He's on a 3-fight losing streak to Cannonier, Delide, and Brendan Allen. He's going to have to fight outside the rankings. And Gregory Rodriguez, his career's been going the opposite. He's been looking amazing. He just absolutely brutally KO'd Jack Hermansson in what might actually be the most brutal knockout of 2025 at UFC 317. Sent him unconscious, then went for a massive hammer fist. And he is one of the most dangerous guys in the middleweight division. It'll be interesting as well, because Marvin Vettori is known for having an unstoppable chin, probably the best chin in the UFC right now. What happens when you combine the best chin with arguably the most dangerous guy in the middleweight division? The immovable power, unstoppable chin, the experiment that we can do in the middleweight division. And it makes sense as well from a sense of rankings. Vettori needs to fight down. I think we give Gregor Rodriguez another opportunity in the top 15. He's a fun guy. If this headlines the prelims, there's no way it's a boring fight. If it goes the distance, I mean, first of all, we need to give Marvin Vettori for the chin for going the distance with Gregor Rodriguez. And on top of that, it'd be a banger of a fight. Vettori's always high output. Rodriguez is dangerous as fuck. And if it doesn't go the distance, it's because Vettori's chin has been cracked and Rodriguez has got another highlight reel. So Vettori versus Rodriguez to headline the prelims, I think will be a banger of a fight for UFC 323. I think they should both be ready by then. Rodriguez fought at 317. Vettori fought at 318. 323 is enough time to prepare. Headline the prelims. Vettori, Rodriguez, get that done. Then for the main card of UFC 323, to kick off the main card, I do Renato Moicano returning against Yoel Alvarez. Yeah, Moicano just lost to Dariush at UFC 317, and he's probably going to have to fight outside the rankings now. He's at number 11. And I say we give him an opportunity, not necessarily outside the rankings, but at least down in the rankings. And I say we give Yoel Alvarez the opportunity. Yoel Alvarez is one of the most slept-on fighters in the UFC. He's got a record of, I think, what is it, like 7-2 in the UFC. Every single one of his wins, not only in the UFC, but in MMA, have all been by finish. He's finished every single one of his wins, and he's like 22-3 in MMA as well. He's one of, if not the best lightweight prospect right now. Let's give him an opportunity. Give him a pay-per-view main card slot in front of a big audience, and let's give him Moicano as well. I think this is a winnable fight for Yoel Alvarez. He probably beats Moicano on the feet. They've both got really good jiu-jitsu. I don't think it goes the distance. To kick off the main card, I think this would be a banger of a fight. We're showcasing a prospect in Yoel Alvarez. The fight itself would be good. You've got a big name in Moicano who you know is going to sell the fight and bring eyes to the pay-per-view. Moicano versus Alvarez to kick off the card. I think it makes sense. Evenly matched. Step down and step up for Yoel Alvarez and step down for Moicano, like I said. Let's get the fight done. Moicano, Alvarez, 323 to kick off the main card. Massive fight. And then I do the return of Arnold Allen against Aljamain Sterling. I've been talking about this fight for a while in the featherweight division. I like this fight a lot. And I think let's get it done Again, we've got a featherweight main event in Volkanovski versus Murphy. So you kind of want to stack this card with a couple of featherweights. And it makes sense. Arnold Allen, he's been dealing with injuries. He's been out since July of 2024. But he is coming off a win over Giga Chikadze. And obviously Aljamain Sterling, he's 2-1 right now in the featherweight division. Just beat Brian Ortega, I think 2 weeks ago at UFC Shanghai. So you've got one of the best wrestlers in the division versus one of the best strikers. I like the fight, and I think the winner gets a title eliminator too. You know, if Arnold Allen can beat Sterling, he's going to be on a winning streak. Give him someone in the top 5. If Sterling beats Allen, he's going to be on a winning streak. Give him someone in the top 5. So it's got big implications for the featherweight division. And again, you've got an English guy in the main event in Leroy Murphy in the featherweight division. You've got an English guy in the featherweight division in the featured fight. Well, not in the featured fight, but on the main card with Arnold Allen. It's like I said, winner gets someone in the top 5. I think it makes sense. Allen, Sterling, striker versus grappler. I think this fight makes sense as well. And I think Allen should be ready by December. He said he wants to return by December this year. And I think if we get him on the last card of the year, he should be recovered by then because he's been out for fucking ages. So let's get him on the card. Allen versus Sterling. A fight that I think makes sense. And then for the featured fight, we'd have another featherweight fight. And I think this could potentially be a title eliminator. Movsar Evloev versus Yair Rodriguez. Now, there's going to be people that don't like this matchup because they might argue that Evloev is the number 1 contender. I disagree. Evloev was the number 1 contender. If you compare him and Leroy Murphy, he's 19-0, Leroy Murphy 17-0, they're both undefeated. They've both got 4 ranked wins. And the difference is, Evloev pulled out against Pico. He had the opportunity to fight Pico and he pulled out. Leroy Murphy took the fight off him and slept Pico. And this spot is about taking opportunities and, you know, running with them. And that's exactly what Leroy Murphy did. On top of that as well, Evloev just unreliable. He's had 11 cancellations in the UFC. I know they're not all of his fault, but he's pulled out a shit ton of times as well. And Yair Rodriguez, he's already been battered by Volkanovski and he's 1-2 in his last 3 fights. He should not be getting a title fight next. Let's book the fight. Title eliminator. Massive fight for the featherweight division. Again, on a featherweight main event. Evloev versus Yair Rodriguez. Arguably the most dynamic striker in this division in Yair Rodriguez. One of the best kickboxers versus the best wrestler in this division. Wrestler versus striker. Winner of this fight, you can argue, gets a title fight. But even then, if Gene Silva pulls through against Diego Lopez, maybe he gets the shot. But I still think it means big things for the division. I think Evloev still needs another fight before a title fight. I think Yair needs another fight before a title fight. What better place to put this fight on than a UFC 323 headliner by Volkanovski? So Evloev versus Yair. Get that fight done. Winner gets a title fight in the next fight, whether it's before Gene Silva or after Gene Silva, I'm not bothered, but get that fight done for UFC 323. And then the co-main event, we're having another title fight. Alejandro Pantoja versus Joshua Van. Yeah, this fight I think needs to happen this year as well. I hope this fight doesn't take place next year. I think we can fit both of these guys in this year. They both fought on UFC 317. Pantoja fighting for the belt, Van fighting against Royval. They both won in spectacular fashion. Pantoja got the submission. Van had a fight of the year contender against Brandon Royval. They faced off immediately after that, and that pretty much confirmed that this fight is going to be next. It doesn't take me to explain why this should be the next fight. Everybody knows this is next. Number 1 guy in the division versus the champion. You know, the champion was some of the best BJJ, some of the best grappling in the division versus one of the best, if not the best boxer and striker in the flyweight division right now. A bit of a veteran in Pantoja versus this young gun in Joshua Van. This is one of the most intriguing fights I've got right now, I think, in the UFC, because again, I'm not going to say it's 50-50. I think the odds should be leaning towards Pantoja. but it's still a very close fight. Like I said, you've got Josh Giovanni, who's been killing it in the UFC, just scrapped and beat Brandon Royval on short notice. He's young. He's a stylistic problem for Pantoja, and there you've got Pantoja, who's creeping up to be one of the greatest flyweights of all time. So I think we get this fight done as the co-main event as well. Van and Pantoja, one of the most intriguing flyweight fights we've had in a while. Get it for the co-main event of the last card of the year. Pantoja versus Van, get it done. And Pantoja usually fights in December. He fought in December of 2023. He fought in December of 2024. I think he can fight in December of 2025, and this is probably his most exciting title fight yet. And then for the main event, like I said, Alexander Volkanovski versus Lerone Murphy. Yeah, this should be the fight that I think takes place next in the featherweight division. I think Lerone Murphy's kind of stole the opportunity because, and I think he deserves it as well. You know, he's undefeated in MMA. He's, you know, obviously won every single one of his fights, 17-0. Took the Evloev versus Pico was what we thought was going to be a title eliminator. He stole the fight. He knocked out Aaron Pico, did it in emphatic fashion. And Volkanovski said he definitely wants to fight again this year. And if he wants to fight again this year, then December's the only opportunity because it's the only pay-per-view left. So let's get Alexander Volkanovski on this card. Let's give Lerone Murphy his title shot. Murphy wants to fight. Volk wants to fight. Evloev's unreliable. Nobody else deserves the shot just yet. So Volk and Murphy, get that fight done. UFC 323, Australia versus England. I think it makes a lot of sense. This new undefeated contender against Volkanovski. Let's get that fight done for UFC 323 to kick off, to end off 2025. And I think that card overall is pretty stacked. You know, the prelims are good. The main card's stacked as well. We've got some young debuts or new debuts on the card as well. So UFC 323, I think, is a pretty solid card. And then we go for the Derrick Lewis main event now. We currently don't have a spot for another crowded fight night. The last fight night of the year is going to be December 13th in the Apex. I say we scrap it. Book Royval versus Cap for early 2026 for another Apex event. And let's do Derrick Lewis in Texas for the last fight night of 2025. Against an opponent that you'll find out. Now, for the early prelims of this Derrick Lewis fight night, we're bringing him back again. Chris Mutino versus Cameron Smotherman. Now, Chris Mutino is a bit of a special character in the UFC. He's kind of been known for weird reasons. Obviously, his main reason of being known is the fight with Sean O'Malley. He fought Sean O'Malley, took an absolute beating, but just kept walking forward, and it was a brutal beatdown, but the guy showed that he's got heart, and then he got TKO'd in his next fight, went back to the regional scene, picked up 5 straight finishes, and came back against bantamweight's best prospect, and got knocked out by Malcolm Wellmaker. And I'm putting him in against Cameron Smotherman. Smotherman's quite a dynamic striker, but he's 1-2 in the UFC. He's going to need a bit of a step down. So I say we get this fight done. Chris Mutino back in the UFC, the final opportunity. This is do or die for Mutino. It's his easiest opponent he's had in the UFC so far in Cameron Smotherman. I think Smotherman might be from Texas as well. So, you know, he's fighting in the home crowd. Mutino, Smotherman, get the fight done, because, you know, you can't really complain at Mutino being in the UFC. He's always going to walk forward. He's always going to scrap. Next fight I do is Markel Medeiros versus Kurt Holloway. Not too much, you know, interest in this fight. It's just the fact that Markel Medeiros, he's on this big winning streak. He's 3-0 in the UFC, and Kurt Holloway is kind of like a journeyman in the lightweight division. So I say we get it done. Markel Medeiros needs a fight soon. Let's get him on a UFC Texas later on this year. I'd also do Ryan Spann versus Kennedy Nezukuku to end off the early prelims. Well, just the halfway through the prelims because it's a fight night. But yeah, Ryan Spann versus Kennedy Nezukuku, because it's a guaranteed finish in the heavyweight division. It's not heavyweight slop. Ryan Spann, he's kind of known more for this in the light heavyweight division, but he is known to be a very hard hitter. He's one of the hardest hitters when he was a light heavyweight. He's got decent submission ability as well. 2 finishes in his last 3 fights, both by guillotine. Kennedy, before his most recent loss, he was on a winning streak by KO as well. Again, one of the most dangerous unranked heavyweights out there. This is a fight with a guaranteed finish, whether it's Ryan Spann by KO or submission, whether it's Kennedy Nezukuku by KO, 2 former light heavyweights who's moved up to the heavyweight division and had some success. I think it makes sense. Ryan Spann, Kennedy Nezukuku, heavyweight, probably going to end in a finish for the prelims of this card. I think it makes sense. And then for the main prelims of this fight night, I'm going to kick it off with, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name, let's just call him Abdul Rahman versus Bruno Lopez. Yeah, Abdul Rahman, he's just come from the Contender Series. He's 7-0. Most of his wins by finish. He just got a good finish on the Contender Series, I think, a couple of weeks back. And I think this makes sense to make his UFC debut. And I'll put him against Bruno Lopez, another guy who's 14-2 with nearly every single one of his wins by finish. He also got a finish on the Contender Series, so I think it makes sense to debut Abdul Rahman on this card. You know, he just fought on the Contender Series. He's going to want a card to debut against. Let's get him on the last card of this year, and I put him specifically against Bruno Lopez because I think it'll be a banger of a fight. Both guys have very high finishing rates. I don't see this fight making it past the first round. Bruno Lopez is coming off a loss. Abdul Rahman's just come from the Contender Series. The matchmaking makes sense. Get it on this fight night card in Texas. Abdul Rahman, Bruno Lopez, potentially 2 finishes in a row with the heavyweight fight as well. I'd get that fight done. And then I'd get one of my favorite prospects in the UFC, Jacoby Smith versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Yeah, I'll get this fight done for Texas as well. Jacoby Smith, I still want to say he's one of the welterweight's best prospects. He's 11-0. Nearly every single one of his finishes are by all in the first round. He knocked out Preston Parsons brutally in the first round in his UFC debut, and he just submitted Nico Price after mauling him for the entire first round at UFC 317. And like I said, he's one of welterweight's best prospects. Let's get him on the Texas card later on this year, and I put him in there against Santiago Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio is usually a fun fighter. It's usually him getting knocked out or him doing the knocking out. You know, he's an inconsistent fighter. It's either him getting slept or him sleeping somebody else. So I'd put him in there to test Jacoby Smith. This is a step up for Jacoby Smith. The guy's 2-0 with 2 finishes in the UFC. Let's put him in there with Ponzinibbio. If you can finish Ponzinibbio, it kind of proves that Jacoby Smith's legit, or at least somewhat legit. And then he can get a step up. And for Ponzinibbio, if he can break Jacoby Smith, that's going to be massive for his career. So again, another fight that I think could be a banger in the welterweight division for the prelims of this Texas card, this Houston card. So Jacoby Smith, Santiago Ponzinibbio, last fight night of 2025. I think it makes sense. I'd also do Mansour Abdul-Malik versus Eric Anders to end off the prelims of this Texas card. Yeah, Mansour Abdul-Malik is 8-0. Every single one of his wins by way of finish, and he's got 2 KOs in the UFC so far. I know his last fight with Brindage was a bit weird, but he's a pretty explosive guy, Mansour Abdul-Malik. And I put him in there with Eric Anders. Eric Anders is on the way out, just got brutally knocked out by Chris D'Elia or Duncan. And I think it just makes sense because it builds Mansour Abdul-Malik. I think Mansour Abdul-Malik might actually be from, I don't know if this is 100%, but I think he might be from Texas. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, let's get him on this card. You know, he's explosive. He's a bit of a prospect in the middleweight division. Let's let him headline the prelims. It probably doesn't go the distance based off his record. And like I said, I put him in there with Eric Anders, who has just been chinned by Chris D'Elia or Duncan. It's a step up for Mansour Abdul-Malik. So I'd have that headline the prelims of this UFC Houston card. And the main card, the 6-fight main card, I'm going to skip over this one quite quick because I've talked about this fight like 8 different times now. Waldo Cortez Acosta versus Rizvan Kuniev. I think this fight makes sense. Cortez Acosta just lost to Sergey Pavlovich. Kuniev just lost to Blades, but he arguably beat him in his debut. It's a step down in the rankings for Cortez Acosta. It's a step up in the rankings for Rizvan Kuniev. They're both pretty evenly matched, both pretty heavy-handed on the feet. I think kicking off the main card, it's not a bad option. So I don't want to keep talking about this fight. I've talked about it so many times, but Cortez Acosta, Rizvan Kuniev, I'd get that fight done. And then for the next fight on this card, Malcolm Wellmaker versus Adrian Yanez. Adrian Yanez being from Houston, Texas as well. This would be straight heat. This is probably one of my most intriguing unranked fights we've got in the UFC, because you've got Malcolm Wellmaker, probably bantamweight's best prospect, slept both of his opponents in the UFC so far. I think he's undefeated as well. And then you've got Adrian Yanez, who was once in that same position. You know, he was on this big winning streak, knocking everybody out, the human highlight reel in the bantamweight division. Like I said, a powerful striker in Malcolm Wellmaker, and kind of a vulnerable but also a dangerous boxer in Adrian Yanez. 2 guys who have got amazing hands, 2 guys who have got, you know, great finishing ability. A former prospect versus a current prospect. Adrian Yanez in Texas. Malcolm Wellmaker versus Adrian Yanez. I want this fight so badly next, man. A match made it after Malcolm Wellmaker beat Chris Moutinho, and I still want this fight, I think, for a fight night main event, to get Malcolm Wellmaker on a main card for the last year, or for the last card of 2025 in front of a crowd. Him and Yanez, there's no way that fight isn't a banger. If it goes the distance, it's fight of the night potential, because they're both just going to be wigging each other over and over again. If it ain't going the distance, one of them's getting knocked the fuck out. So there's no way that fight's a boring fight. It builds the name of Malcolm Wellmaker. It's a step up for Malcolm Wellmaker. It's a massive opportunity in his hometown for Adrian Yanez. This fight needs to happen, and I feel like the last year of 2020, last card of 2025 on a Texas card, that fight makes sense there more than any other. I'd also do Kevin Holland versus Neil Magny. I know they've both got fights booked, but I think regardless of if they win or lose, it's a fight that I kind of want to see in the welterweight division. Kevin Holland is 2-1 since moving up to, well, in his last run in the welterweight division. He's just lost to D-Rod. Neil Magny in a similar position, 2-2. They're both kind of win-loss fighters, but I feel like it'd be fun. You know, Kevin Holland just had that massive scrap with Daniel Rodriguez, nearly finished him. Neil Magny, when we all thought he was washed, just went out there and finished Zaleski de Santos. 2 guys that I feel like are in a weird but a very similar position. Not only do they look kind of similar, they're both kind of these skinny 170s. They're both always jumping about the top 15 borderline rankings of the welterweight division. They both deliver finishes every now and then. They're both inconsistent with their performances. It's just the fact that I feel like I'm shocked hasn't happened yet, and I want to see it happen. And again, we're doing it in Texas. Get Kevin Holland on a Texas card. Give him Neil Magny. Win winner potentially gets someone in the top 15. I'm surprised we've never seen this fight yet, but again, I feel like respective of what happens between Mallet and Mallet and Holland and Magny and Jake Matthews, let's see the fight, get Kevin Holland in Texas. He wants to get 6 fights in 2025, let him fight in the last fight night, get him in there with Magny, get that fight done. I'd also do for the featured fight, Macy Barber versus Rose Namajunas. Yeah, we need at least some women fighting on this card, so I do Barber versus Namajunas. Macy Barber, he's on a winning streak, but she was supposed to main event early this year and pulled out on the day off, so I don't think the UFC are going to be rewarding her with a step up. Rose Namajunas, she's 3-1 in the last 4 fights, probably going to get a step up after beating Miranda Maverick, and I think the winner should get a title eliminator. Between who wins between Macy Barber and Rose Namajunas, because they are both winning consistently in the flyweight division, I think whoever wins this fight should probably get a title eliminator. Maybe against Natalia Silva, who's going to be waiting because obviously Zhang Weili's moved up. So I don't know who they fight, but Macy Barber, Namajunas, it's supposed to happen before. It hasn't happened yet. Let's get this fight done. Let's book it on the last card of 2025, or at least the last fight night of 2025. I guess it's a bit of a step up for both of them, but yeah, I think it makes sense. Barber, Namajunas, get it done. Then for the co-main event, let's bring back Joaquin Buckley and let's give him Michael Morales in Houston, Texas. Yeah, this would be a banger of fight as well. And again, big implications for the welterweight division. You've got Joaquin Buckley, who was once on a massive winning streak, just lost to Usman in the main event. Michael Morales, who just won in the main event, is also on a big winning streak. You've got one of the most explosive strikers in the welterweight division right now in Joaquin Buckley, a guy who hits like a truck, a guy who's been killing it on the feet, who's improved so much, against Michael Morales, who's probably the best not prospect because he's a contender now, but one of the best up-and-coming guys we've got in the welterweight division. Undefeated, just knocked out Gilbert Burns, heavy hands as well, great striker. I think it's got big implications. I'd say the winner of this fights the winner of Edwards and Protez. What a banger of a tournament that would be. The winner of Buckley and Morales faces the winner of Edwards and Protez, and whoever wins the tournament fights for the belt. Like if Michael Morales can, knock out Joaquin Buckley, and maybe Carlos Protez can beat Leon Edwards. Imagine like a title eliminator, Morales versus Protez in a main event where he gets a title fight against JDM. That'd be a fucking banger. So Joaquin Buckley, Michael Morales, co-main event of this card. I think it makes sense. It's a banger of a fight. It's pretty 50-50. It's a step up for Morales. I guess it's a step down for Buckley, but it's not an easy fight. I think it makes sense. Co-main event for a fight night as well. You can't really ask for any better than this because in most cases this would be a main event. So Buckley, Morales, get it done. Then for the main event, the Derrick Lewis main eventer. I've talked about this fight before and I stick by it. Curtis Blaydes versus Derrick Lewis. Yeah, we've seen Derrick Lewis in fight night main events in his last 2 fights and he's delivered in both of them. Got a first round knockout and a second round knockout in both of them. It's time for the Derrick Lewis title eliminator in the heavyweight division. And I put him in there with Curtis Blaydes. Blaydes is coming off a win over Rizvan Kuniev, but considering it was against a debutant and it was very close, it's not that impressive. And we've seen it before. Derrick Lewis starched Curtis Blaydes out cold before. And the reason I want to see this fight is because we need new contenders at heavyweight. If Derrick Lewis can knock out Blaydes again, Derrick Lewis versus Tom Aspinall is probably going to be next for the heavyweight belt. And that fight, even though it's a weird fight, it intrigues me so much because first of all, Derrick Lewis is a big name. He's a massive name. Him and Aspinall would be an interesting build-up. And I actually think he's got a good chance of beating Aspinall because to beat Aspinall, you're not going to outclass him. You're not going to outpoint him. You're not going to outdo him. You're not going to out-savvy him. It's going to take a massive fucking, fuck-off overhand right to land on the chin of Tom Aspinall. And Derrick Lewis is the type of guy to do that. So let's give him a title eliminator. It's Curtis Blaydes. It's a guy that he's beat before. It's a step up in competition. It's a main event. If Derrick Lewis can beat Blaydes, which I actually don't mind his odds of doing, then it's going to be Derrick Lewis fighting for the belt again. And obviously for Blaydes, if he can beat Derrick Lewis, I don't think he should be getting a title fight, but from there it would be on a 2-fight winning streak. Maybe you put him in a title eliminator against someone else in the top 5. So Curtis Blaydes, Derrick Lewis, Houston, Texas main event for Derrick Lewis. I know he's kind of got a bit of a Houston curse going on, but let's get it done. Blaydes, Lewis for the last card of 2025. Let's give Derrick Lewis another fight. I think that makes sense. But those will be the cards that I'll make to end off 2025. UFC 323 and Houston, Texas with Derrick Lewis fight. Let me know your thoughts on these fights and the cards if you agree, disagree with them. Thank you for watching.